Hello. Who's lazy? Any lazy people? Right, good. It's a good count. All right, okay. Who's using AWS? Good. All right, okay. Who wants really technical or just like high overview, epic story stuff? Technical? Okay, all right. Oh. All right, so yeah, I suppose it's an interesting story, I guess. I'm kind of like one of those old school ops guys who was like, I like real computers, network switches, you know. Didn't really like containers much because they can't be secure, but it is Linux, and I like that. So, also, I'm very tired, by the way, sorry. I didn't come from Sainsbury, I came from Thailand. It's 2 a.m. there right now. Anyway, yeah, so I was like, kind of like that, you know, when I first came across it. And I was just like, oh my god, no, it's not safe, I don't trust it. And then I sort of realized actually like a lot of the security holes in my infrastructure were just like infrastructure DevOps failures, like bad security groups. And Kubernetes solves a lot of that for me actually, if I do it as code. Then I sort of felt like that, you know, everyone else is like doing Kubernetes and like, whoa, it's really cool. You know, I actually wanted to use my systems. You know, does anybody else want to run their computers hot? You know, because they're just sitting there. So yeah, the first steps, if anyone's, has anyone actually deployed Kubernetes in AWS? Yeah. Has anyone tried and failed? Yeah, me too. Yeah, so I mean, this is like a little checklist, really. So it isn't always the DevOps person's choice as to what they're actually running. So if someone's running WordPress or, I don't know, Cassandra, Kubernetes is probably not for you. But if you've got Gophers on your team and they want to run stuff that's all lovely and 12-factor, it's worth a look. And another real good question is, you know, with the normal traditional Kubernetes way, when you deploy it, you always end up sort of like in the situation where you're like, I've got a cluster, it's great, it's running, and it's about 3 months later, and you're like, oh, version 1.6 is out. Should I tell the boss, or shall we just ignore it to 1.7? Or, you know, you can kind of take the philosophy of burning disposable stateless stuff and apply that to Kubernetes as well, and just run 2 clusters, do blue-green between your clusters like you would do with 2 servers with an ELB, which is kind of what we decided to do. But, you know, kind of coming along with that is then, okay, my Kibana can't live in Kubernetes if I just burn it in 3 months' time, because I might actually want those logs. But yeah, security, blah, blah, blah. Anyway. So yeah, the biggest question about Kubernetes is persistent volume, I think. This is the biggest thing that stops people from running stuff on it, because it's not Kubernetes actually, it's Docker. It's not part of the philosophy, and I kind of actually hated that, and now I like it. It's 2017, and Amazon doesn't allow you to have multiple machines that read from an EBS. You can't do it. It just doesn't exist. That's the biggest problem with Amazon, I would say, and Kubernetes. But it's not a problem if you're going to try and do stateless stuff and just use it. Kubernetes is what it's good at, which is orchestrating apps, making them run, sending the logs to the right places, isolating them from each other. So if you make that decision, yeah, the good news is that it's really easy. It's really easy to turn it on. It's really easy to kind of upgrade it. But you kind of, when you start and look at all the, what do you say, the YAML files, lots and lots of YAML files, you have to start learning what all those lines mean. And you have to think about kind of what you're going to run on it. Obviously not Cassandra, hopefully, unless it's testing. Yeah, so I recommend a tool called kops. Is anyone here familiar with kops? Has anyone tried it like 6 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sucked, right? Sucked. like if you want to run stuff, you want to run them in private subnets, you want to isolate the machines, you want to make sure that ingress is in a different area, you want to make things better, you want to put security in there and start adding users to your cluster. If you're using a cluster that's been pre-rolled by somebody else, it's fundamentally a problem because you don't have control. Like if you built it from Puppet, Share, Fanciful, whatever, Bash, you know, you've rolled your cluster, you have full control over the insides of it. The only problem is it took you 7 months to do it, and it breaks a lot. On the other hand, you can then decide to try and use something like kops, which is actually pretty good. When I first started using it, I think it was in the pub. It took us about 10 minutes, and I had a cluster running, and I was like, oh, that's okay. Because I'd rolled clusters before with Ansible and sat there and hacked loads and loads of stuff to get it to work. So if anyone doesn't know kops, it works in a similar way as Terraform does. So you give it a definition, you say, I want to have a cluster, I want to have 7 servers, I want to have 3 masters, I want to have XYZ hard drive storage, ephemeral, whatever. And I want to call it foobar.example.com, and I would like to turn it on, please. And it says, okay, give me an S3 bucket, give me a fully qualified, resolvable domain name. So that has to be resolvable. Once you've got that, you basically write down the name of the S3 bucket, your root 53 domain, and turn it on. And it'll take about 10 minutes, and it kicks up a couple of auto-scaling groups, just like you would do with, well, like you would hopefully normally do. But it works. But I think we'll talk about Kubernetes a little bit now. Sorry, guys, I'm really tired. Yeah, so even once you've got a basic cluster running and working, one of the things that bit us was we were like, okay, we've got these namespaces, like, containerization lets you like isolate stuff, and Kubernetes actually came with a lot of really good surprises. You're kind of like, oh, if only they've done that. You Google something and you're like, oh, if only there was, someone's done that. Copy the YAML file, play it in, and it just works. And then sometimes you come across something like namespace segregation where you're like, oh, yeah, so your stuff is in namespace foo and mine is in namespace bar, and they're not going to totally talk not to each other. No, because they wouldn't do that on default. It does. If anyone's going to throw up Kubernetes, very important, make sure you have CNI enabled. CNI is the kind of library that allows for running BGP or SDN within Kubernetes. So if you've got an existing VPC, let's say, and you want to run Kubernetes, but you say, okay, I'm going to boot up, 7 servers, easy peasy, and then let's pretend that your VPC has got 24/24, so you have 250 something IPs. And then you throw up 7 servers and you're like, okay, now let's start deploying our apps. And the way Kubernetes works is every app gets its own little IP stack. And suddenly, once you've thrown 100 of them on, and you're doing redundancy, right? So 200 IPs have just gone. You're going to wish that you had a CNI plugin, which is some kind of like Weave or Calico. Anyone here use Weave, Calico? Others. But anyway, with that, it's actually kind of cool, because now my subnets are very small. They used to be really big, and I had to plan lots and lots of different subnets out and try and orchestrate things. And if you're on Amazon, by the way, you can't route more than 50 subnets in a VPC before you start hitting network issues. I recommend Calico. Let's just start there. Okay, what else did I write? Private subnets. Private subnets are very good. Obviously, I think I mentioned that. API / yeah, so this is one of the kops things. Right? This is one of the kops things. When you deploy kops, it's going to give you a publicly resolvable DNS, and unless you specify it, you're going to actually have people being able to contact your actual masters on their public IPs. So that's another thing to think about. And this is another one you'll know from your kops experience before. If you want to start adding users and groups and doing ABAC or RBAC or webhooks or whatever into Kubernetes, that didn't really exist until recently. It's still very much blah, blah, blah. So this is an example command with kops. This is a very long one. A default one would kind of like be like that long. What I'm saying there is I'm running the alpha version. I want to put it into this VPC. I want you to take up that amount of IP addresses in these zones. I want my masters to be in every single zone. Size matters, I guess. Yeah. Public key, this is for people like me to log into servers. Now, topology private is a new feature in kops, which you don't know about, I assume. Now,
I opted for a different solution because the topology private is not really what I want.
yeah, but it depends what you need. And I like to put my servers away from public IPs. But anyway, yeah, and yeah, so you can use Weave, you can use Calico. There's several others. Kops also will let you run CoreOS, Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, CentOS. You can roll your own AMIs, in fact, and it just puts user data into the launch configs of the auto-scaling groups. And it stores all of its secrets in S3, which is not particularly great, but it works, and you save 7 months. Again, yes, namespace segregation, always very important. Blah, 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 blah. This is how you would do namespace segregation. So there's 2 different files here. First one is I'm defining a namespace at the top. Those brackets, don't worry about them. They're just variables that I would swap in and out. And if you don't do that, it won't isolate that namespace. It will exist, and any containers and pods running in there will happily service requests to anything else in that cluster that wants to talk to them. One of the good things, though, if you're using an SDN with Kubernetes, is that because they operate on their SDN layer, like BGP if you've got Calico or whatever, normal machines on your subnets will not be allowed to speak to it. So it kind of keeps everything nice and safe, hopefully. One of the cool things with Kubernetes is these match labels strings. One of the things you see with this is that whenever you see match labels, this could be foo, and this could be bar. It doesn't really matter what it is, it's just a list. You can define that wherever you want, and that is just saying this bunch of containers, whatever they are, can be contacted by the ones operating in those namespaces. And yeah, compared to security groups, it's kind of simple. Ugly, but it works. Another thing that I hadn't really extensively thought about before I decided to jump in with Kubes, but it annoyed me, and I was like, oh, if only someone had done it, was to say, how do I give one container access to an S3 bucket when I have, somebody else's app from department foo who doesn't need access to their secret S3 bucket? And Kubernetes lets you do that. Well, it's not Kubernetes, but it's a little tool called kube to IAM, and it's kind of crazy. It runs IP tables as a privileged container on your servers. And one of the nice things about Amazon, if anyone's curl 169 blah 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 blah, is it's over plain text HTTP because Amazon. And kube to IAM basically runs IP tables and catches anybody trying to get AWS credentials transparently. You define a default role. You say, these guys, this is the default, everyone can access SQS on default, or whatever. And you just run it. And there's a default role specified here. So any container that will attempt to get credentials will get middleman essentially by your servers, which makes me happy. And you can see the logs of a tool like this. And it will just sit there and intercept people trying to do stuff. And say, oh, no, you have IAM role, blah, 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 blah. You're allowed this. And because it's doing STS under the hood, you know that you've got reasonably good security, it's rolling security after them. And I think the thing that I liked about it most is that I just grabbed the YAML file and ran it. There was a bit of fiddling, but that's the thing. I mean, with Amazon, Kubernetes works. It's a fantastic little, it's an abstract that allows you to get away from running AWS specific stuff the whole time. Most of the time, you just want to run something. You just want something that talks to something else, and I know that it's working. You know, and I think the thing that annoys me the most about any hosting provider is that the language to speak to them is always different. But then, when you start working with Kubernetes, you suddenly you dive into this world of like, oh my goodness, like it's the same language. If I was running this in Azure or on bare metal, preferably bare metal, but anywhere, it doesn't matter. You're speaking the same language with Kubernetes. You're booting up an API inside of an infrastructure that can control it. So if you say to AWS, if you say to Kubernetes, I would like these servers to have persistent volumes or ELBs or DNS records, it can provision them dynamically for you. And I love the fact that it's a language that's separate from everything else. This is an example of a bit of Terraform that provisions an IAM role to a specific container. And all this is just an example if anybody wants to get their hands dirty, but it's actually not that complicated. It's quite a standard bit of Terraform that, I think. But without an example, it can appear quite daunting when you first do it. But with Kube2IAM and with giving specific access to AWS for containers, I felt a lot more comfortable with it, with Kubernetes. You know, I'm not a salesman, but it's okay. What else have we got? Oh, yeah, I promised to talk about Prometheus. Anyone here use Prometheus before? A couple of hesitant hands. Anyone federated with Kubernetes? Prometheus? Yeah? Come on, I know you have. Okay, so Prometheus is another one of those things that lets you kind of change your mindset. You know, it changes the way you think about load balancing your metrics themselves. So like, for example, our decision with this was that we were going to run a Kubernetes cluster that had no state. So no logs, we didn't care about the logs. What we did, we took them off. We didn't care about the metrics living inside the cluster because we were happy to shoot the cluster in the head and just switch our load balancers onto a new cluster. So the rolling upgrade idea of, you know, Kubernetes blah, 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 blah version is out. It's very simple. You just download the kops binary, run the same thing, spin up a new server, deploy all your apps to the new cluster. Obviously, you have to pick a name and give it a DNS thing. But it makes life a lot easier, especially with this. So our Prometheus, for example, just lives on an EC2 host. It sits in the VPC, and it just looks for a load balancer with the right tags to say, hey, I'm the Prometheus inside Kubernetes. And the one inside Kubernetes does what Prometheus does. It just automatically discovers any apps that have got the metadata that says, we've got metrics, check me out, and /metrics. It just scrapes them, and we pull it in, and that works. We keep burning the clusters, and the metrics are still there. What else have we got? Oh, I'm running out of stuff. So this is a bit of Jenkins file. Has anyone worked with Jenkins file? Yep. So, yeah, well, I mean, there's nothing great and specifically amazing about it, except for its infrastructure as code, and I think you guys should like that. There's a couple of weird things. I was never a Java person, Java-esque, lots of curly brackety stuffy. But I enjoyed working with this once I realized that I could kind of write functions, like go deploy function like that. And inside there I would just say, run these commands, blah, 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 and then I'll just pass it to functions and move on with my life. And I recommend having a look at Jenkins files specifically because it's got a nice little feature where you can have one repo which contains all of your deploy logic like this, lots of functions or whatever you would like. And you can then simply have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of app code which simply point at that Git repo. So when your builds occur in develop, staging, or master on the application Git repos, it will actually point at your central code and build and deploy, and well, that's about it really. I do recommend having a look at it, even though it is Java.
Configuration as code, I think you guys will like that, understand it tonight.
Questions?
Anyway, I've got a question for David.
Sorry, it wasn't technical.
You think that Q2 IAM is that secure for you?
Well, I think it's better than just giving them access to everything.
But what if you use secrets with access key and secret key very restricted for every?
No, we do that. We do that too, but it's kind of one of those things like we already had an infrastructure in Terraform for provisioning the roles, and we were like, well, you know, we were basically picking up ECS clusters, very big empty ECS clusters with IAM credentials, and we were like, well, actually I don't need to port this. I've got the role, I just need to be able to get those credentials to it. And it has STS, so it's rotating the keys underneath it for me, and if it goes wrong, it's Amazon's problem. But, well, it's their fault. It hasn't yet, so it's always what's going to waste you more time, save you more time, and what gets the job done. Yes.
Cool. Any other questions for David? Great.
On the Namespace network isolation slide, I might have missed this, but is there a way to explicitly allow certain containers from Namespace to talk to?
Yeah. I mean, on default, a namespace will only speak to itself. Oh wait, no. If you do that, then the namespace will only be able to speak to itself, or deny external stuff coming in. But anything within a namespace will contact anything else. But I think.
But today I was running like Prometheus and one namespace, and I wonder which one is talking.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of wizardry inside there, and there's lots of ongoing philosophy around that because it's not network efficient to send traffic out and in to one machine to another when you've got two containers running on the same machine. And that's why tools like Linkerd and all those kind of guys are like shiny because they're basically middleman in Kubernetes itself. Yeah, I'll talk about it in the pub. There's a lot of options.
Okay. Any other questions for David? I think it's really interesting now. People are actually using it in production. Who's using Kubernetes in production? Just a couple, yeah. So people are actually using it now. We're getting these war stories coming out. It's really, really good to hear. Some of them don't do that, don't do this. It means we can all be lazy, and that's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot my punchline is don't use Amazon, use Google Compute.
That's a mic drop if there was one.
No, it just works. I'm sorry.
David, thank you.